Wuchang Fallen Feathers version 1.5 update is finally up, and there are a lot of new interesting changes and improvements that have been added to the game, like animation changes, improved AI, and better combat, especially for one-handed sword and longsword users, along with some cool bug fixes and performance adjustments. As one of the content creators who covered all of the best leveling spots in the game, one of the burning questions in every update is, do our staple farming methods work after the patch? I'll be answering these questions with actual tests later on. Jumping straight into the recent changes, which involve invincibility frames when Wuchang gets up after being knocked down. In the past, I thought that this was seriously one of the things that Lindsay or the devs of this game should really focus on. Right off the bat, during my early progress in the game, I've noticed that the old iframes or design of the get up animation will cause a lot of frustrations to a lot of players, especially players who love to smash their face buttons just to get up quickly when panicking. If you are one of these players, there is a high chance that you have found yourself constantly stun locked, leading to countless deaths. We all know how relentless the majority of the bosses in this game are, so I guess this is a welcome change for new players in the series. To be honest, we Souls veterans can just carefully time in our get-ups and avoid getting stun locked, which I exactly did in my case, so at least in my opinion, it's not really a big deal in the past, but I can see that it is one of the welcome change for other players. I tested this thoroughly and I can totally feel the difference, especially not getting damaged even when rolling towards the boss when in the middle of the get up animation. The second major change that a lot of you will surely love is Lindsay sped up the healing animation of Mana Vase. Just like what I felt in the get up animation, I've noticed the healing animation's long wind up time when I first played this game. Again, this is a minor issue that any Souls veteran can handle. To be honest, I didn't mind the super slow healing animation since I am used to it after spending half of my life playing Souls-like games. However, I can pretty much say that the old healing speed animation did not match Wuchang's core combat speed. I felt that the old healing speed matches something like in Dark Souls 1 and the like, and Wuchang is not a particularly a slow Souls-like game if that makes sense. Somehow, Wuchang matches Bloodborne's playstyle and overall combat speed, so it should only be natural that the healing speed of Wuchang works like how Bloodborne does it. So finally, they did it. The healing speed is substantially faster, and not only that, you can quickly get out of healing animation by just dodging. This is a total win for a lot of players since after this change, I am enjoying the game's fast-paced combat even more. Now this one is pretty vague. Lindsay made adjustments to animations, values, and level design for certain NPCs and AI. Speaking of AI, the closest thing that I can think of is the boss's AI performance. I've noticed that bosses in this game tend to do the same moveset over and over, especially before the patch. You can clearly see this most of the time due to the boss's nature in this game being relentless. So they have a tendency to spam a moveset over and over. Of course, it's not an issue at least from my end since I can counter every move that a boss can throw at me, especially when I already know how to dodge and counter a certain move. So the enemy dies quickly because he or she is spamming it like always. But it is such a bummer to see the same movesets over and over. I noticed this flaw a lot when I fought the final boss in chapter 2 in the shaft. So I will need to do another playthrough to test all of the bosses' AI properly, and we will see if they are better or not. If you have been playing Souls-like game in the past years, you are already used to controlling a silent protagonist just like me. However, I don't mind having at least a character that can speak from time to time. So at least Lindsay added more dialogue for Wuchang in the recent patch. This could add more flavor to the game story since it completely revolves around Wuchang, so having more dialogue for her is a nice addition. Questlines plays a major role in Souls-like games, so Lindsay adding a finishing dialogue for some of the NPCs after you complete each of their questlines is a great addition in my opinion. You may not see its importance, but I swear there are a lot of NPCs not just in Wuchang but in other Souls-like titles as well that have confusing plot endings, and most of them don't have any clear indication that their questlines are already done aside from the obvious ones of course. So I need to replay the whole game once more to see the other questline changes, but for those who just started the game, this change is a great addition. Now the next change pissed me off big time because it affected one of the best farming spots in endgame, and I will dive into it later on. Lindsay fixed the faction bug in chapter 4, adjusting the level design as well and increased the performance effect of BVB. Not really sure what BVB means, but in simple terms, They made the human faction immortal and can't be targeted in Chapter 4. Chapter 4 was intended to be chaotic and it matches the chapter's theme very well. It's not necessary to make the human targets untargetable or immortal in this case. Making them immortal or untargetable is too distracting and takes away the immersion, at least from my case. Chapter 4 was intended to be chaotic and the conflict between the feathered and human type enemies intensified the said conflict. Not really sure what the devs mean by fixing the quote-unquote bug in the faction war, but the way they change it makes it even look buggy, to be honest. I think they did this because it is adding too much pressure on the new players in the genre. But in my opinion, it's just right and it doesn't need fixing because Chapter 4 is already endgame. Enough sour graping for now, and Lindsay fixed the dialogue order between Fang Yao and He Yu Zai to prevent a bug where players could not achieve the bound by face threads and dream sweet deceit endings due to an incorrect dialogue or questline sequence. In Souls-like games, there are a lot of ways to tackle NPC questlines, so this fix is highly appreciated. It can be frustrating not to get specific endings because of bugs. Lindsay fixed the issue causing audio playback stutter on certain hardware models. Now I don't know what specifically is causing this issue. However, I've experienced this issue a couple of times during my first playthrough. It's not game breaking or anything, but the audio stutter surely break the immersions most of the time. So I am glad to know that Lindsay is addressing this one. Lindsay is a Chinese developer, so I can expect them to have translation issues in both actual audio and item descriptions. Again, this is not game breaking or anything, but it's nice to know that Lindsay is trying to polish the game from small things like this to the bigger ones. The developers fixed an issue where certain keys could not be set in key binding menu and where some key changes could not be saved after rebinding, such as left shift, left control, and left alt. I don't necessarily change my key mappings unless a certain control highly differs from traditional Souls-like basic controls, but I can imagine that a lot of players would love to customize their controls when playing with a keyboard, so this is a huge win, at least in my opinion. I firmly believe that issue that affects character performance should be prioritized in every game, especially when it comes to damage results. Lindsay fixed an issue where combo-based benedictions and jade pendants do not work properly in NG+. I love to play aggressively, so light combo attacks, especially when playing long swords, plays a vital role in my playstyle. It would be frustrating to know that combo-based pendants and benedictions will not work in certain builds like this, so I appreciate Lindsay fixing the said issue. The next one is Lindsay improved their level design a little bit by fixing possible stock issues when traversing certain terrains. This happened to me multiple times during my first playthrough. I tried to replicate the issue of being stuck, especially in Cloudspire Outskirts or Chapter 2, and I'm happy to say that so far I haven't encountered any issues of being stuck during my test runs. Now for late game players, I'm very sure that I'm not the only one who noticed the horrible waiting time of elevators in Chapter 5. Chapter 5 itself has a lot of elevators to access different areas, so the waiting time piles up over time. I highly appreciate that they finally adjusted the waiting time and tripled the speed of the elevator after you pulled the lever. You can pretty much see the changes of the speed in the recording that I am showing you right now. However, Lindsay mentioned that the actual travel time of elevators when you are on it did not change at all due to loading issues. I think it's pretty much fair to not change the speed when you are on the actual elevator, and my only concern in the past was the actual waiting time, so I'm happy to know that Lindsay already addressed this concern. 100 sword users will rejoice with this change, where Lindsay finally adjusts the poise or impact resistance of some of the early to late game enemies. Lindsay reduced the impact tolerance of some primary enemies, making it easier for light weapons to interrupt the attacks of some monsters in the early stages while increasing the strategic nature of light attacks. For later stage monsters or late game monsters, players can now use spells, weapon skills, etc. to directly perform follow-up light attack combos to suppress some monsters. I'm a longsword user and I can pretty much say that this weapon type does an okay job of staggering enemies, but not really that great in general. However, I still find longswords give at least a serviceable performance, but in my opinion, the one-handed swords are the best weapon type that benefited from this change a lot. I played the one-handed swords after the recent update and I felt a much more fluid and strategic gameplay since I can just cast spell on the fly without feeling forced in terms of animations. Really liking these changes so far since they made me want to play one-handed swords compared to when the game was initially launched. I am a liar if I say that traps in this game did not affect me at least in some way, especially the landmines in Chapter 2. There were times that I almost ticked and almost lost my patience, given that these landmines could have damaged Wuchang a lot in the past. But of course, like other Souls-like games, I learned to adapt and stop rushing things since this mindset kills me most of the time. I can't help but to rush things at times since I do have a very strict schedule when it comes to content creation. So I can imagine a lot of players are dying from these mines alone, especially since we are dealing with a lot of landmines in Chapter 2. So Lindsay adjusted the damage of landmines in this case. They even reduced the number of landmines in Chapter 3, and I believe they are pertaining to the mines placed on Revel Camp near Zenwu Temple. I can pretty much say that the damage was drastically reduced even if you step on multiple ones. So new players will surely find the landmines mechanic manageable after the recent update. However, the poise damage of these mines, especially against multiple enemies, was not changed. So if you love using mines to stagger groups of enemies, the strategy remains viable after the patch. The spike traps also receive adjustments by making the intervals between spike activation longer. All of the spike trap in the game is deadly as hell, so you will find it little less forgiving after the recent update. Soon you can now re-challenge the boss as soon as you die in combat, giving you the option to respawn at the entrance of the boss arena or have an option to respawn back to the nearest shrine you've visited. Let me be clear on this one, this is not yet available in the game and will likely to be applied in the next patch. I super love how fast I can just re-challenge the boss, especially if I have deadline or if I'm rushing the content. On the other hand, I don't mind respawning back to the nearest altar to re-challenge the boss just like how it was for a long time in every Souls-like game that I played, as long as the travel distance is justifiable and not overstretched. Lindsay also adjusted the whole game content to prepare for the update of new weapons and sets from the Deluxe Edition compensation. Just in case you are not aware, players who bought the Deluxe Edition will receive additional armor sets and weapons on top of the original Deluxe Edition items. Pretty excited about this one since I'm a fan of Souls fashion, and according to Lindsay, the new ones will explore the Wei and Jin Dynasty armor themes. All the latest changes and features are cool, but nothing is more important than improving the overall performance of the game. Especially the most controversial aspect of Wuchang revolves around its performance since launch. So the devs are working tirelessly on releasing performance updates. We received a lot of improvements in terms of performance, which I'm showing on the screen right now. And I'm not going through each and every one of them to save time since they are all pretty straightforward. Feel free to pause the video if you want to read all of them, but overall, all of these are a big win, especially for low-end rigs since a lot of issues involve players with low-end systems. As promised, I've tested all the best farming spots in the game to update you guys on whether all of them are viable after the recent update. Starting with the early game best spots. The first on the list is the Shu Sanctum Gremlin spot. With an early game progress, you're still expecting at least 115k to 120k worth of red mercury gains per hour, while the Mort Gordo spot in Chapter 2 still provides 183k to 190k plus worth of red mercury per hour, so it is safe to say that the top 1 and top 2 spots for early game are still viable after the recent update with no change at all. If you are wondering how to access all of the spots that I'm testing right now, I have provided all of my farming spots videos from early to end game progress in the description for your convenience. Diving into the mid-game spots, the Avian March spot in Chapter 3 is still alive and kicking, which can still give you a whopping average of more than 400k worth of red mercury gains per hour. And at the end of Chapter 3, the Zenwu Antechamber spot is still the best spot overall of mid-game, which can give you 510k of red mercury gains per hour. Moving on to the endgame spots, the Palace entrance method is unaffected by the recent patch, giving you a crazy amount of 1.2 million red mercury gains per hour. This spot is currently the best in Chapter 4 overall, and you will soon know. Remember that Lindsay made all of the human type enemies untargetable in Chapter 4, right? This means that all of the spots that involve human type enemies in this chapter were severely affected. Sadly, the Ruined Reverend Temple spot is no longer the best spot overall in Chapter 4 because you can only take out feather type enemies in this spot, which leads to poor red mercury gains per hour. So I may need to update my endgame farming spot soon. But the good news is, the best overall spot in the entire game remains untouched, which is the Forbidden Land spot in Chapter 5, which still can give you a mind-blowing 4.3 million of red mercury per hour without the ceramic jar equipped. Pretty cool update overall, except for what they did to Chapter 4, where they immortalized all of the human-type targets. Let me know if you're enjoying the changes so far, but if you just started the game and want to know the best tips to have a perfect start, click on this video and I will catch you on the next one.